For hundreds of years, China stood taller than every other nation on earth. Its wealth was so vast that foreign kings begged just for the chance to trade. Its people believed their empire would last forever. And then, quietly, without cannons or armies, something small began to change everything. A flower, a single plant. Opium, no one noticed at first. No one imagined it would bring the greatest empire in the world to its knees. In the year 1800, China was the center of global power. Nearly 1/3 of all goods made on Earth came from its lands. Silk, porcelain, tea, paper, and gunpowder all flowed from China to the rest of the world. European nations wanted these treasures badly. But China did not need Europe. The emperor believed foreign nations were backward and had nothing worth trading. If Western merchants wanted Chinese goods, they had to pay in silver. And they did. Ship after ship arrived, loaded with silver coins. And ship after ship left filled with Chinese wealth. One city controlled this entire system. Canton, in southern China. It was the only port where foreigners were allowed to trade. They were not welcome guests. They were tightly controlled. They could not bring families. They could not learn Chinese. They could not travel inland. They lived in special buildings outside the city walls and were watched closely. All trade had to go through a small group of approved Chinese merchants called the Hong merchants. The most powerful of these men was Hakwa. He was not just rich. He was likely the richest man on earth. His warehouses were filled with silver. His home was filled with art, servants, and rare treasures. Foreign merchants bowed to him because without his approval, they could not trade at all. The system worked perfectly for China. Silver flowed in. Goods flowed out. China grew richer every year, but the Western merchants were growing desperate. Their countries were running out of silver. England, especially, had a problem. The British. People were addicted to tea, but Britain had nothing China wanted in return. The silver drain could not continue forever. The merchants needed a solution. Something China would buy. That solution arrived quietly, hidden in the shadows of the harbor. By 1830, Canton no longer felt like the proud heart of the world. The ships were still there. The markets were still loud. But something was wrong. The city smelled different now, sweet and bitter at the same time. Opium smoke hung in the air, like an unseen fog, drifting through homes, shops, and tea houses. What had once been hidden was now everywhere. Walk through a narrow alley and you would see it. A tea house from the outside, an opium den inside. Men lay side by side on wooden platforms, officials, laborers, merchants, even monks. Their eyes were empty, their bodies thin. Some had not worked in days. Some had not eaten. All they wanted was the pipe. Opium was no longer a luxury. It was cheap. It was everywhere. British traders had flooded the market. In just 10 years. Imports had exploded from a few thousand chests to nearly 20,000 a year. Silver poured out of China faster than anyone could stop it. Prices rose. Taxes failed. Farmers could not pay. Officials could not collect. The Qing government was trapped. Opium was illegal, but many of the men meant to stop it were addicted themselves. Others were paid to look away. When crackdowns were ordered, they failed. When arrests were made, bribes followed. The poison had climbed too high into the system. Families began to fall apart in small homes across southern China. Wives waited for husbands who never came back from the smoking houses. Sons sold tools, furniture, even land to buy another dose. Fields went unplanted. Shops closed. Entire villages slowed, then collapsed. At the harbor, foreign merchants counted profits. Men like William Jardine and James Matheson had grown incredibly. Rich, fast ships now carried opium up and down the coast, far beyond Canton. Offshore islands became floating warehouses beyond Chinese reach. From there, smugglers delivered the drug straight into the empire's veins. The British had solved their problem. Silver now flowed to them. Tea and silk followed. Britain grew stronger. China grew weaker. In Beijing, reports finally piled too high to ignore. Silver shortages, rising crime, officials begging for help. The emperor could no longer pretend the problem was small. In 1839, he made a choice that would change everything. He sent Lin Sexu. Lin was not a soldier. He was a scholar, known for honesty, known for strength of will. When he arrived in Canton, the city held its breath. He moved fast. Opium dens were shut down. Dealers were arrested. Addicts were forced into treatment. Even powerful merchants trembled. Then Lin turned to the foreigners. He demanded they surrender. All opium in their possession. Every chest. No excuses. No delays. The foreign factories were surrounded by Chinese troops. Food was cut off. Water was cut off. Weeks passed. Tension grew. The merchants panicked. Millions of pounds worth of opium sat locked in warehouses. Finally, the British trade official gave in. The opium was handed over. More than 20,000 chests. What Lin did next shocked everyone. He destroyed it. For weeks. Workers dumped the opium into trenches near the sea. Salt and lime were mixed in. The drug was washed away into the water. The largest drug seizure in history vanished before the eyes of stunned merchants. Lin believed he had one. The poison was gone. Been enforced. China's dignity restored, but far away, in London. The reaction was fury. British politicians did not see opium as poison. They saw it as property. British property. They did not blame the merchants. They blamed China for resisting free trade. Powerful voices demanded action. Warships were prepared. Back in Canton, rumors spread. Foreign ships were coming. Iron ships. Steamships. Ships that did not rely on wind. Lin strengthened defenses. Cannons were placed. Soldiers drilled. Confidence remained. China had defeated invaders before. It would do so again. They did not understand how much the world had changed in 1840. The British fleet appeared off the coast. Dark shapes on the horizon, smoke rising from metal hulls. The first shots shattered Chinese forts with explosive force never seen before. Wooden walls splintered. Guns were silenced in minutes. Battle after battle followed the same pattern. British ships stayed out of reach. Their cannons tore through defenses. Chinese soldiers fought bravely, but bravery meant nothing against iron. And fire port after port fell. Canton was forced to pay ransom. Cities surrendered. The empire staggered. In 1842, British ships sailed up the Yangtze River. The heart of China lay open. Faced with disaster, the emperor agreed to peace. The Treaty of Nanjing ended the war. China paid millions in silver. Hong Kong was handed over. Ports were opened to foreign control. Foreigners were placed above Chinese law, and opium continued to flow. China had lost more than a war. It had lost control of its future, and this defeat was only the beginning. The war was over, but China did not find peace. What followed was something far worse. A slow, painful unraveling of an empire that had once believed itself eternal. After the treaty, foreign ships no longer hid. Opium arrived in broad daylight. Guarded by cannons and treaties, more ports were forced open. Foreign flags rose over Chinese soil. British, American, and French merchants built their own districts where Chinese law no longer mattered. To the Chinese people, it felt like the country was being cut apart piece by piece. Opium spread deeper into the land. What had once been a coastal problem moved inland along rivers and roads. Farmers, soldiers, scholars, and officials all fell. To the pipe, work slowed. Hunger grew. Families sold land passed down for generations. When there was nothing left, they sold their children. The drug did not just destroy bodies. It broke trust, discipline, and hope. The government grew weaker by the year. To pay war debts, taxes increased. To meet quotas, officials squeezed the poor. Corruption became normal. Local leaders ignored orders from Beijing. The empire still existed on paper, but real control was slipping away. Then the rebellions began. Across China, angry men gathered behind new beliefs. Some blamed the foreigners. Some blamed the Qing rulers. Some blamed heaven itself. The largest uprising was the Taiping Rebellion, led by a man who claimed he was sent by God to cleanse China. It became one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. Tens of millions died. Villages vanished. Fields burned. All the while, opium never stopped flowing. When foreign imports became too expensive, China began growing its own. Hills once covered in rice now bloomed with poppies. By the late 1800s, China produced most of the opium it consumed. The poison had become part of the economy. Officials relied on it for tax money. Farmers relied on it to survive. Stopping it now felt impossible. Foreign powers saw weakness and pressed harder. More treaties followed. More land was taken. More ports opened. Foreign soldiers walked Chinese streets. Missionaries spread new beliefs. Western banks controlled Chinese money. Even Japan, once a student of China, defeated it in war. Each loss cut deeper. In 1860, foreign troops reached Beijing itself. They looted and burned the emperor's summer palace, destroying treasures collected over centuries. For many Chinese, that moment marked the death of pride. It was no longer just defeat, it was humiliation. By the end of the century, China was no longer master of its own fate. Maps were drawn by outsiders. Railways were built for foreign profit. The emperor ruled, but only in name. The people whispered that the mandate of heaven had been lost. In 1911, it finally ended. The Qing dynasty collapsed. After more than 2,000 years of imperial rule, the throne stood empty. A child emperor stepped down. China became a republic, broken, divided, and addicted. But history did not stop there. Decades of struggle followed. Warlords, invasions, civil war. Yet slowly, painfully, China began to rise again. After 1949, the opium trade was crushed through force and reform. Fields were burned. Addicts were treated or imprisoned. The flower that had once conquered the empire was finally destroyed. But the memory never faded. The story of opium became a warning passed from generation to generation. A lesson carved deep into national memory. Weakness invites control. Addiction invites collapse. No empire, no matter how great, is immune. What destroyed China's greatest empire was not just a drug. It was pride, isolation, the belief that the world would never change. It began with smoke drifting through quiet rooms in Canton. It ended with the fall of a dynasty. And even now, long after the pipes went cold, the shadow of that flower still lingers over history, reminding the world how easily power can slip away and how empires often fall not with a roar, but with a breath.